All right, so are you ready to dive into a movie that's going to stick with you?
Oh, yeah, I am.
Let's talk The Babadook.
Okay.
It's way more than just like a typical horror movie.
Oh, absolutely.
This one uses those creepy scares to get at some like really deep stuff like grief and trauma,
Yeah.
the pressures of motherhood.
Yeah.
And honestly, those are all things we can all relate to on like some level at some point, right? So we've got a good plot summary and some like deep analysis to help guide us. So
Great.
let's just jump right in.
Sounds good.
One of the things that I think is so cool about The Babadook is it doesn't just like throw jump scares at you.
Yeah.
It's that
It feels this like
unsettling atmosphere. Like
Yes.
it gets under your skin and you really start to question like what's real and what's not.
right. When you
Yeah.
start watching it, you think, okay, this is like a haunted house story.
Yeah.
But then it takes this really sharp turn and it's like, whoa. Okay.
Mhm.
So for
Yeah.
those who haven't seen it, let's set the stage here.
What is the basic premise of the film?
So the film follows Amelia, a widowed mother who's struggling to raise her son Samuel
Okay.
after her husband's tragic death. And they're both obviously dealing with the trauma.
Yeah.
But Amelia especially
Yeah.
seems to be stuck in this cycle of grief and denial.
Yeah, she can't really move on.
Yeah.
And then this creepy pop-up book shows up.
Yeah.
Mr. Babadook.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely not your average bedtime story. So tell me about this book.
So this book, it describes this monstrous creature, the Babadook,
Okay.
and it torments families
Oh.
and drives them to madness.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah. And so as Samuel becomes fixated on the book,
Oh, boy.
strange and increasingly terrifying things begin to happen around the house.
Oh, no.
And it really starts to blur the lines between reality and Amelia's mental state.
Yeah, so is it the book? Is it her?
Exactly.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the more that she tries to ignore this Babadook thing, the stronger it seems to get, which kind of mirrors our own, like, inner demons, right?
Yeah,
If we don't confront them, they take over,
absolutely.
especially when you're dealing with something as overwhelming as grief.
Exactly.
And then there's that catchphrase,
yeah.
you can't get rid of the Babadook.
So chillin'.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean?
I think it suggests that these dark parts of ourselves, these painful emotions, you know,
Yeah.
they're just part of being human.
Wow.
You can't erase them. You have to find a way to live with them.
Okay, so we've got this creepy monster, we've got
Yeah.
this grieving widow,
Uh-huh.
this deeply unsettling atmosphere. What do critics make of all this? Is it just a good horror movie, or is there like something more profound happening here?
I think a lot of critics view it as a really powerful metaphor for unprocessed grief.
Okay.
But it's not just a general metaphor. The film really cleverly uses Amelia's interactions with the Babadook
Okay.
to represent the specific stages of grief.
Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how it connects those stages to the story.
Well, so at first, Amelia, she denies the Babadook even exists.
Okay.
Just like she denies the reality of her husband's death.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the Babadook becomes more intrusive, she gets angry.
Yeah.
She lashes out at Samuel and everyone around her.
Right.
And then it's like the classic bargaining stage where she tries to make deals with the Babadook to try and get it to leave her alone.
Yeah.
And it's really brilliant how the film uses these horror tropes to show what's going on internally with her.
So it's not just using these tropes, it's actually using them to symbolize something.
Exactly.
That's really cool. So
Yeah.
it really is more layered than just your average monster movie. And I think it really speaks to like the power of horror to get at these really complex human experiences.
Absolutely.
But before we go too deep into the analysis, let's talk about the technical side of things.
Okay.
The director, Jennifer Kent,
Yeah.
creates this really specific look and feel for the film.
Yeah, she does.
So what were some of her stylistic choices?
Well,
And how did they contribute to the overall atmosphere?
visually, the Babadook is heavily influenced by German Expressionism,
Okay.
which is a style of filmmaking known for its distorted visuals, stark lighting,
Yeah.
and just an overall sense of unease.
Okay, I'll admit, German Expressionism
Yeah.
sounds a little highbrow for a horror movie discussion.
Yeah.
So can you give me some concrete examples of like what that looks like in the film?
So think about those classic black and white horror movies,
Okay.
like Nosferatu or like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari
Okay.
with the crazy shadows and distorted sets.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Babadook uses those same techniques, but in color,
Okay.
to make you feel constantly on edge.
Gotcha.
You see it in like the shadowy hallways of Amelia's house.
Yeah.
The way the camera angles are slightly off, making everything feel a bit wrong.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like the film itself is designed to make you feel as unsettled as Amelia is. And it's not just the visuals.
Right.
The sound design plays a big part, too.
Absolutely.
Right.
The film uses a lot of jarring noises, unsettling whispers,
Yeah.
even strategic silences
Okay.
to keep the tension high.
So you're just like waiting for the other shoe to drop,
Exactly.
for the Babadook to pop out. So it's really this combination of the visuals, the sound, the story itself that creates this truly immersive and unsettling experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the genius of Jennifer Kent's direction comes in. She doesn't just scare you. She draws you into Amelia's psychological state.
You're not just watching her unravel.
Yeah.
You're feeling it, too.
Right.
You're forced to question what's real and what's not, just like the characters in the film.
And that blurring of reality, I think, is what makes the Babadook so effective at exploring these themes of mental health.
Absolutely.
Which is a perfect segue into our next topic.
Okay.
How the Babadook tackles the complex world of mental health. Let's unpack that after a quick break.
Sounds good. So the Babadook doesn't shy away from showing how mental health struggles can manifest to different ways.
Yeah.
You've got Amelia trying to maintain control while like internally falling apart. And then there's Samuel, whose reaction to the trauma is much more external and chaotic.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It highlights how everyone processes grief and trauma differently, especially kids.
Yeah.
You know, Samuel's behavior, his outbursts, his fixation on the Babadook, it could be seen as his way of coping with something that he just doesn't understand.
Exactly. And the film doesn't judge either of their reactions.
Right.
It just presents them as these raw and honest portrayals of what it's like to live with these burdens. And this kind of brings us to another key theme.
Okay.
The often unspoken pressures and isolation of motherhood.
Yeah, and that's something that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
You know, society puts this expectation on mothers to be perfect, to always have it together.
Yeah, always be nurturing.
Right.
Always patient.
And the Babadook kind of challenges that idea head on.
Absolutely.
It says, no, that's not really how it works.
Yeah, the film critiques that societal expectation that mothers should just be endlessly patient, loving, and nurturing no matter what.
Right, and Amelia's clearly struggling,
Yeah.
but she's still trying to live up to this impossible ideal.
Yeah.
And it's that pressure cooker environment combined with her unprocessed grief that really contributes to her mental deterioration.
Absolutely.
And the film never explicitly states whether the Babadook is real or a figment of Amelia's imagination. Do you think that ambiguity is intentional?
I think so.
Okay.
By blurring those lines between the supernatural and the psychological,
Yeah.
the film kind of mirrors the very real experiences of those struggling with mental health.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be hard to distinguish what's real and what's not
Right.
when you're in the midst of a breakdown.
And that ambiguity just makes it even more terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It really does.
It forces us to confront that idea
Yeah.
that maybe the scariest monsters are the ones that we create within ourselves.
Absolutely.
And it also makes you think about how we often dismiss or misunderstand those who are struggling with mental illness.
Right.
And the film doesn't try to like diagnose Amelia or offer these easy solutions.
Yeah.
It just presents her struggle with honesty and empathy, which is something we rarely see in mainstream cinema.
Especially in horror.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of things we rarely see,
Okay.
let's talk about the symbolism in the Babadook.
Okay.
Everything from the Babadook itself to the pop-up book, even the basement, seems to have a deeper meaning. Can you walk us through some of that?
Sure. So the Babadook itself is like a visual representation of Amelia's repressed grief and trauma. It's this shadowy, monstrous figure that she tries to ignore, but it only grows stronger the more she resists it.
Yeah.
And then the pop-up book is also really important.
Okay.
It's not just a spooky prop. It's a manifestation of her mental state.
So the book is literally like feeding her paranoia and fear?
Yes. The imagery in the book is disturbing.
Yeah.
And it gets increasingly graphic.
Oh, wow.
As her mental state deteriorates.
So it's like the book is a physical representation of her, like, unraveling psyche.
Exactly.
That's really creepy.
Yeah.
The basement is another element that's mentioned a lot in our notes here.
Yeah.
How does that tie into the symbolism?
So the basement is where Amelia keeps all of her husband's things.
Oh.
So it's a place where she literally and metaphorically locks away her grief.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting that by the end of the film, the Babadook ends up living in the basement.
So the basement represents that space where she's compartmentalized her grief.
Yes.
And the Babadook, as a symbol of that grief, is contained within that space.
Precisely.
That's a really cool way to tie that all together. And I think that final image of the Babadook in the basement really speaks volumes about how we deal with grief and trauma.
Yeah.
It suggests that we can't just eradicate these things.
Right.
They become a part of us, but maybe we can find ways to manage them, to keep them contained so they don't completely control our lives.
Exactly.
And that's a really powerful way to look at that ending.
Yeah.
It's not about getting rid of the Babadook.
Right.
It's about finding a way to coexist with it. It's about accepting that darkness is a part of us.
Yeah.
And finding ways to not let it consume us.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes the film so effective. It doesn't offer this simple resolution or happily ever after.
Right.
It just leaves us with a more realistic and maybe even hopeful perspective on coping with these things.
And that nuanced perspective is brought to life through some truly remarkable performances. Essie Davis, who plays Amelia, is phenomenal.
She's incredible.
The way she portrays Amelia's descent into madness is both terrifying and heartbreaking.
Yeah, her performance is captivating.
It is.
She manages to convey the raw vulnerability and intensity of someone on the verge of a breakdown.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she elicits empathy from the audience.
You still feel for her, even though she's doing these kind of terrible things.
Exactly.
And Noah Wiseman, who plays Samuel, he's equally impressive.
Yeah.
He brings such complexity to that role.
He does.
It goes way beyond just like the typical creepy kid trope you see in a lot of horror movies.
Agreed.
Samuel's behavior is often disruptive and unsettling.
Yeah.
But Wiseman's performance also hints at the fear and confusion of a child who's trying to cope with trauma in his own way.
Absolutely.
And I think those performances really elevate the film.
They do.
They ground it in those like real human emotions.
Yeah.
So it makes those scares so much more impactful. It's not just about jump scares. It's about real people dealing with real issues.
Absolutely.
But let's zoom out a bit.
Okay.
How did the Babadook fit into the horror landscape of 2014? Was it a trendsetter or part of a larger movement?
It's interesting that the Babadook came out around the same time as this wave of horror films that were moving away from that more graphic, gore-heavy style that had been popular in like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You had films like The Conjuring and Sinister that were also tapping into this idea of atmospheric dread and psychological tension.
Over explicit violence.
Right.
So was the Babadook part of a shift towards a more subtle psychological style of horror?
In a way, yes. But I think the Babadook went further. It wasn't just about creating a creepy atmosphere.
Yeah.
It was about using that atmosphere to explore deeper themes and emotions.
So it was about making the audience feel something.
Exactly.
Not just jump out of their seats.
Right.
So it shared some stylistic elements with other horror films of the time, but it also had this unique depth and emotional resonance that set it apart.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes the Babadook so significant.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a great horror film. It elevated the genre. It showed what horror could do when it's used to explore these complex human experiences.
Right. And it paved the way for all those elevated horror films that really prioritize character development and thought-provoking themes over just cheap scares.
Exactly.
And speaking of thought-provoking,
Yeah.
the Babadook generated some pretty unexpected buzz.
Yeah, it did.
Outside of the horror community, particularly within the LGBTQ+ community.
Right. The Babadook becoming an LGBTQ+ icon is so fascinating.
It is.
It shows how audiences can reinterpret and reclaim even the most unlikely figures.
And it started organically with the fans.
Yeah, it did.
A lot of LGBTQ+ viewers saw these parallels between the Babadook's struggles with being ostracized and misunderstood, and their own experiences with societal rejection.
Exactly.
So the film's themes of otherness, repression, finding power in the face of adversity really resonated with a community that wasn't explicitly represented in the film.
Absolutely.
And then there was that whole incident where Netflix accidentally categorized The Babadook as an LGBTQ plus film.
Oh, yeah. The Netflix snafu.
What do you think it says about how we interpret art?
Well, I think it highlights how meaning is often created by the audience, not just the creators.
Yeah.
It shows that art can be so powerful.
Yeah.
For self-discovery and validation.
Yeah.
Especially for marginalized groups.
Right.
Who see their own experiences reflected in these unexpected places.
And the fact that so many people embrace the Babadook as a queer icon, regardless of the director's intentions, speaks to the film's power to kind of transcend its original context.
Absolutely.
And connect with audiences on a very personal level. It's a reminder that art is always open to interpretation, and that those interpretations can be incredibly powerful.
They can be.
But before we wrap up our discussion on the cultural impact, let's shift gears and talk about how The Babadook was received by critics and award committees.
Right.
It sounds like The Babadook wasn't just a hit with horror fans and the LGBTQ plus community.
No, it wasn't.
But, like, critics loved it too.
Oh, yeah. The Babadook was praised by critics all over the world.
Wow.
They loved its originality and Jennifer Kent's direction and the power of the performances. It won all sorts of awards at film festivals.
Like what?
Best First Film from the New York Film Critics Circle.
Wow.
Best Direction from the Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts.
Okay, so we're not just talking about like a cult classic here.
Oh.
This was a legitimate critical success.
It was.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
For a film that, like, on the surface just seems like a pretty straightforward horror movie.
Right, and I think that recognition just shows that it goes beyond genre expectations. Yeah, it's a horror film, but it's also a film about grief and trauma.
Yeah.
About all these complex human emotions.
Right. It's something that everyone can relate to.
Exactly.
I think we've done a pretty good job of unpacking those uncomfortable truths today.
I think so.
We talked about the symbolism, the themes, the performances, the cultural impact, the critical reception.
We really went deep.
We did.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that keeps people coming back to the Babadook and talking about it all these years later is that ending.
Oh, yeah, the ending.
It's so ambiguous.
Yeah.
Amelia confronts the Babadook, but she doesn't destroy it.
Right.
She keeps it in the basement.
Yeah, she feeds it worm.
Like it's a pet.
Almost like a pet.
It's such a weird image.
It really is.
What do you make of that final scene?
It was definitely open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Some people see it as Amelia finally accepting her grief.
Okay.
Learning to live with it.
Yeah.
She's not letting it control her life. But she's acknowledging its presence.
Right.
Its power.
It's almost like a metaphor for how we deal with our own inner demons.
Exactly.
You know, those parts of ourselves we want to hide.
Yeah.
We can't erase them.
Right.
But we can learn to coexist with them.
Keep them at bay.
Right. And I think that's one of the most profound messages of the Babadook. It's not about easy answers or simple solutions. It's a much more like realistic view of the human experience.
Yeah. Darkness and light, grief and joy.
Yeah. They're all intertwined.
They are.
It challenges us to confront our own inner Babadooks. Those things about ourselves that we try to hide.
Yeah.
And it suggests that maybe facing those demons is the first step towards healing.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Thank you.
The Babadook really makes you think.
It does.
It makes you confront those monsters that are lurking inside all of us.
Yeah. We all have them.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Babadook.
Wow.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We did.
But you know, there's always more to explore.
Oh, yeah. This is a film that deserves to be talked about and debated for years to come.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
So check it out if you haven't already.
You won't regret it.
And let us know what you think.
Yeah.
You know, we're always up for hearing your theories and interpretations.
Absolutely.
Until next time, remember.
What's that?
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
Oh, he might just be a part of you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm out of here.
All right. See you next time.
Seriously, though, thanks for listening, everyone.